Well, good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you having everybody on the line today. Before we get started, I just want to quickly welcome Phil Barry. He's an Instrument Awareness Team, so since he's on the line, I wanted to give him a quick shout-out before we got things going. So welcome today, Phil. Today I'm really excited about the session that we have for you this afternoon. It's a really cool spot. I have a chance to go through this presenter and really get in the details of what we're going to talk about today. It's just a really cool subject that I think we've had some demand for in the past, so I think a lot of people on the line today are going to get a lot out of it. So happy to welcome Caroline Dangson from IDC on the line with us today. Before I introduce Caroline and get going with the session, I just want to quickly walk through some housekeeping issues with everybody on the line. If you've been to one of these before, you probably already know, but if you have any questions, feel free to contact technical support at WebEx. And to do that, in the WebEx browser in the upper left-hand corner there, right next to the event tab, see a button there called Help. You can use that. You can also submit a question through the Q&A, and we have some great people at WebEx that are chomping at the bit to answer any technical questions that you may have. We doubt that there'll be any, but if you do, just feel free to use the Q&A as well. Also, for those of you that are on Twitter, feel free to join the conversation on Twitter. Submit any questions, comments, ideas, thoughts, anything you have using the hashtag #PoundAwarenessInc. And we will be monitoring that stream throughout the session, and every question we'll try to get to. If we don't have time to get to every one of them, we will follow up with you following the session and make sure that your question does get answered. So before we jump into the session, just a quick overview of who awareness is. And I have to apologize up front, because we're using multiple templates, I actually had to take a screen grab on my Mac, so it underlined a couple of words I didn't know, which were SaaS. And for those of you who don't know what SaaS is, it's software as a service, and Greylock, one of our investors, so we apologize to Greylock up front. The company itself, Awareness, or social media marketing software company, the big thing to know about us is our goal is to help make marketers more effective, and the way we do that is through social media. And we've been around for a while. We've helped a lot of organizations in multiple verticals achieve social media success, primarily through building and launching their own communities. And those communities can be focused on specific marketing programs, or more broadly focused on helping customers or prospects, or just gaining awareness. We work with a lot of companies, and I won't go through each one and bore you. We also have deep relationships with some of the leading marketing agencies in the world. And I know there's a lot of marketing agencies on the line today. I took a quick look at who's joining us today. So welcome to everybody who's on the line from the agencies. We do a lot of work with agencies, and I'll quickly talk about that real quick. Basically, it's simple. Awareness provides the technology. We have an on-demand software suite, like I mentioned. The partner, the agencies that we work with, provides all the services, the campaign management, implementation, moderation services, and the end result is a happy customer who's using both technology and the services of the experts that we work with to launch their social media program. And just a quick overview of what our software does, or our suite of software, I should say. In a nutshell, Awareness is a platform that we've built in all the most important social networking components that an organization would need to be successful in social media. On top of them, what we've done is gone out, and based on the feedback we've got from customers, we've packaged up 7 best practice communities that are focused really on use cases. And that's important because for each individual use case, we've also layered in administrative elements that include dashboards and ROI metrics. So for each use case, whether it's a corporate voice, whether it's around innovation, or if you're trying to focus on peer-to-peer support, we've built in the ROI metrics you're going to need to understand the success or failure of what it is that you're doing from a social perspective. And we have those built right into the admin console. In addition to that, we give you the opportunity to mine all the data, all the profile, all the content information that's available within your community, as well as monitor the sentiment both internally and externally to the community that you have. So how is what's the sentiment online in your community and on the rest of the web regarding your brand? And you can monitor that all as part of one seamless solution. So this is our product set, and I promise you that now that I've said that, that's absolutely the last sales pitch that we're going to have for the rest of the session. The rest is all going to be about learning. And it's really my pleasure to introduce Caroline Dangson from IDC. She's a research analyst that's focused on how businesses use social media, both inside and outside the firewall. And like I said, the presentation's been great. We're really excited to have Caroline on the line. And Caroline, welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks a lot. It's interesting. I started at IDC as a marketer, so I definitely bring that perspective now that I've transitioned to an analyst, and I wake up every day excited that I get to cover such a very cool and fast-moving space. It's really the Wild West, especially when we look at social media and business. So I'm really thankful that, my job is actually to research this. I think it's a really cool topic. So I'm excited to be here and to share some of my thoughts. I'm actually taking some time out from talking about the technology and really focusing on corporate culture and more specifically operational barriers that I believe impact corporate culture and ultimately can determine the success of social media initiatives. So what I really find so interesting about covering social software and business is how much of the success is tied to organizational behavior and psychology, which I'm just fascinated by. It's not so much the technology platform that, the technology enables behavior, but it doesn't guarantee it. It allows people to communicate at scale and at speed, but it really takes the motivation of people wanting to use the technology in order for that to happen. So on the first slide, I thought I'd just start off establishing, an idea of what I mean by social business. What are the characteristics of social business? So I'm going to try to go through these pretty quickly, but just to, establish what I'm talking about here. So the first and foremost, transparency and trust. I think the real value of social business is, the transparency of recognizing and discovering resources that you might not have known that you had before. So that's being a huge value to businesses and sort of discovering new experts or people who in the organization chart, it might not show them as a person having the knowledge that they actually do have and can assist in certain areas of your business. Second, egalitarian, that this is really where every voice counts, all participants are empowered, and, decisions are made in a less centralized nature, and problem solving is distributed to all participants. So everyone feels very empowered to contribute to your business. Also key to this is that people are the center, not the documents. It's really focused on people, on employees and your customers, whether we're talking inside or outside the firewall. It's really about people. And this really, social networks, online communities recognize that the self-organization of more informal networks to allow people to self-organize in groups of interest, as well as this concept of two-way unstructured information exchange. Information is not just sent out, in one direction, that there's really a lot of commenting and user-generated media contributions and feedback happening with social business. And also that events are orchestrated and not controlled, which is really somewhat newer and scary for large enterprises today. And that success is tied to participation, that being a real key, that you can set up the technology, you can establish your online community, but it's not necessarily that if you build it, people will come, that it really takes a lot of work to make sure that everyone is participating and sustain that participation. So I chose a little cartoon here. It's a little dark, but I think that, this is sort of classic view of corporate cubeland, and this is a cartoon from The New Yorker, and I think it just nicely illustrates how businesses can add new layers without really thinking the basic framework. So you see here people are working around a dead guy. They're oblivious to the fact of that they've just added this layer, and that, they kind of have neglected the core. And I thought this was a good illustration that with social business, it's an opportunity to look, take a step back, look at your business. Don't add, don't make social media the separate thing that you're doing. Allow it to to encourage the silos to sort of break down within your organization and to rethink how you're doing business. And this is really referring to employee communities, but I think the same can be said about how your employees are also interacting with your customers. So really just breaking down these silos that we even see represented in a physical way in CubeLand. So what I find as a research analyst is that many large corporations maintain a classic business model that was derived from the industrial age. And this is when mass manufacturing drove the economy. So characteristics of this are command and control, assembly line business processes, top-down decision-making, internal focus. And it's really based upon a hierarchical structure that is very internally focused and not really how, we're operating today or how we need to operate today, in the information age. It's a much different world. Companies are facing just tremendous competitive pressures to innovate. They need to scale globally. Now, with the internet, 24/7 needs of customers and employees. And we find that employees are really becoming more tech savvy, that there's a mobile workforce. Workers they're working remote, on the go, and they need access to information anytime, anywhere, from any device. And that's the same for your customers as well. So as one CEO I talked to put it, it's really becoming the BYO workplace, sort of bring your own, where, I personally don't want to carry around two different mobile devices, mobile phones, and I will choose to use my personal device at times for business purposes just for the convenience. So this is a sort of an example of what analyst firms are calling the consumerization of IT, and this is where workers are starting to bring in, consumer devices, introducing the consumer web into business. And so consistent with this trend is social media. And here we find that in a recent survey that I conducted, social media services like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter are entering the workplace bottom up, and we find that 1 out of 2 U.S. workers are using these public-facing consumer sites for business purposes at least once a week. So it's really interesting that, the workforce has been empowered to bring in, these sites and use them for businesses sort of under the IT radar. And it's really about employees being empowered to do so and taking their own initiative to do this. What we also found with this survey is that a huge gap remains between consumer social tools like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and corporate-sponsored social tools. So, what awareness provides or other vendors in this space. So we're finding that the consumer web is actually getting much more play in business than corporate-sponsored tools, and that really just speaks to how this is such an emergent market. I really think the gap is going to narrow over time. We're already actually starting to see that just within this past year. So here I highlight that with social networking is where we see the largest gap, actually. And for those workers who said they use consumer social media instead of corporate-sponsored social media, it was really the reasons for doing so were that the ease of use, so a simple user interface, it was just really simple to use, and that they were familiar from personal use. So that was really driving why they preferred the consumer web over, the corporate intranet or whatever the corporation was providing for communication collaboration. And what's interesting is that it's kind of putting the CIO in a reactive position. I found this really interesting that the Robert Half Technology Group came out earlier this year with a survey that they conducted. And, this wasn't an IDC survey, but I really appreciated their methodology. This was actually a phone survey, not a web survey. So the data I presented before was conducted from IDC, and that was a web-based survey. But the Robert Half Technology Group, they found, and it was somewhat surprising even to myself that 54% of CIOs completely prohibit public social networks at work. And, you know, the CIO has historically been viewed as sort of the corporate watchdog responsible for knowing where, you know, corporate data lives and securing it. So it's really a little unsettling to them to know that, you know, these public social networks are being brought in and used for work. So, you know, we also heard from a web security software provider, ScanSafe, that they saw a 20% increase in the number of companies blocking public social networking sites in the first half of this year. So these were two big signs that the CIO was kind of starting to react to what was happening, this concept of workers sort of adopting these tools and bringing them in, you know, at their own initiative. And I just highlighted that there. Sorry about that. So the next slide kind of presents this cartoon, you know, does this mean the end of social media anarchy? And it's just a funny cartoon about, you know, they have to pretty much take the, you know, computer away. And it's, you know, it's so true that the CIO can control what happens in the work environment, and they, you know, can control, you know, based on the devices they're providing for employees. But the reality is that employees, again, going back to the BYO workplace, are working from home. They're using personal devices. It's really about convenience. And there's only so much in trying that the CIO can control, and it's really an uphill battle to do so. You know, sort of tracking these trends is very similar to the instant messaging story in the last 5 years, how IT just had to accept it, and we started to see the maturity of these tools provided from software providers that were enterprise class. So this slide, I don't think it's a build, or maybe it is. There we go. Okay. So this slide, you know, as a research analyst, I'm responsible for doing a forecast. So the builds didn't really build in the correct order, so I apologize. There's a lot of information to digest. But really my theory is that, you know, with social media anarchy happening that I just presented about public social networks being brought in, the CIO not being comfortable with, you know, what's happening is that it's really going to push companies to look at sponsoring these tools for workers. A survey we conducted last year showed that nearly 80% of information workers said that they did not think their organization was effectively using Web 2.0 tools. So it really led me to believe that the main reason workers were adopting the public-facing consumer tools was not only for the ease of use and simple user interface, but also because the companies just weren't supplying these tools themselves. And I think that's going to change over the next year. And I think as the economy improves, we're going to see businesses start to invest more in social software, whether it be internally for employee communities or externally both. So, you know, what I found surprising almost just in terms of the growth over just the past 10 months was from a survey we conducted in January to one we conducted last month in October, is we saw that the current corporate usage of enterprise class tools, so including awareness, Jive, social text, it rose by a factor of 8. So I think businesses are really, you know, there's this idea that the economy sort of pushed a divide where there were some companies sort of willing to really look at this investment because they wanted to connect the dots better, they wanted to work faster, they wanted to get closer to customers during these bad economic times. It also, on the other hand, forced some companies to kind of retreat into comfort zone. So I think in 2009 we saw a little bit of this divide. But I think in 2010 we're going to hear more successful case studies, more ways of measuring ROI that's really going to show the value of socializing your business. And we're going to see more people really make investments here. Of course, purchasing social software, back to the whole point of today's webinar, does not mean it's not going to automatically make your business any more social. So I'm, again, back to that cartoon. But with the survey that I conducted last month, we found that the top challenge most U.S. workers told us their organization faces by social media initiatives is getting people, whether it's internally their employees or their customers, to participate. So we know a reality of online communities is that, you know, a small percentage actually contributes content, and, you know, that's relative to how many people are within your community. So if you don't have a lot of community members, you're really kind of scrambling to get people to contribute through commenting or guest blog posts or just really showing participation, and that being a top challenge. So now I kind of get into the bulk of what I wanted to present today about, you know, operational barriers that could be standing in the way. And the good news is that, you know, you don't have to break down all of these barriers, obviously, before you invest in software. The software can help break down these barriers. But I think it's important to understand and take a larger view of, you know, what can we do within our corporation to kind of develop this culture that supports these activities. It doesn't make it seem like something extra that we need to be doing. So for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to outline what I call the top 10 operational barriers to social biz success. And then at the end, we'll ask you actually for your input with 2 polls, and then I'll provide some best practices based on the research that I've done. So jumping right into it, a major barrier that I see is organizational silos. The organizational framework provided these days by most companies is sort of the published organizational chart. So I have that sort of classic chart presented here. And it's really a result of legacy hierarchical structure. I mean, you can see the silos so clearly. You don't really see a lot of interactioning happening at the lower levels where really a lot of the work gets done. You see that it has to sort of rise to the top before you have sort of departments start, you know, interacting and talking. So, you know, I feel like there are, you know, physical and symbolic barriers, you know, with the organizational chart. So many of us have heard, you know, sometimes in a response to requests for help, I work in such and such department and I don't handle those requests, you know, and that's, you know, such a put off. So it really encourages people to focus on their assigned functions. You know, I work in this department, this is what I do. And again, like I said, we don't see a lot of interaction except at the top. And then this can lead to somewhat misaligned priorities and initiatives. I bet a lot of people in the phone sort of feel this tension between IT versus marketing. Marketing being very strategic and wanting to do things to bring value to the organization and sort of help the bottom line. And then IT feeling responsible sort of somewhat financially and securing that, so there being some tension there. And it was interesting, I was talking to VP of marketing at a large IT company, and I'll protect their name because a lot of people don't like to confess to having struggles, but I did have an interesting conversation with this person, and this company or the marketing department had made, you know, a pretty sizable financial investment for online community software. And this was an external community for customers and prospects, and it was actually built with a media partner, so it wasn't on the corporate's website. And, you know, I talked to this VP of marketing and asked sort of what the issues were. And, again, it was back to we're having a hard time getting people to participate, even find our community. And so I went to the corporate website because some studies that IDC has done is we found that at least in a B2B setting, most people will start with a general web search, which will lead them to the corporate website. So I said, why don't you have a link from your corporate website back to your community, you know, tying all of this together? Because the thought was, you know, if it was outside of the corporate website, I guess it would be easier to do with an external vendor and not have IT too heavily involved. But because IT wasn't really brought in, IT didn't feel responsible and actually pushed back and didn't really prioritize making that link from the corporate website to the community. So this situation, really demonstrated to me struggles that companies have when social media becomes part of a department agenda. So I argue that, we really shouldn't be thinking about creating another department, another agenda, another silo within an organization. This is an opportunity to really pull key players in all the departments together, maybe have more of a committee that's really invested and brings the perspective of each department, including IT, legal, accounting, to have everyone's investment up front, because there's certainly going to be challenges down the road. So I actually don't advocate for there to be a creation of another department. And that's something that we can debate in Q&A, certainly. But I didn't want to spend too much time on that, but I think that's a really important barrier that I'm seeing with, socializing your business. The second one being command and control management. The style is really at direct odds with social strategy because it's all about egalitarian, participatory nature of how people should be empowered to participate. So this is really somewhat antisocial. And it's been shown to actually demotivate employees and prevent them from speaking up. So it's really not what social media is all about. And it's, really working with managers, whether that be HR or someone in the company, to recognize that managers might have a hard time if this is their style, and helping them to adjust and understand that employees feel more connected to a business when they can make comments and suggestions, and that's ultimately good for the business, but sometimes hard for managers to adjust to. I love the Dilbert cartoon that really kind of illustrates the point of leveling the playing field. This really can be terrifying territory for managers not used to getting employee feedback, and I thought that this was funny because it really hit home. These two guys come up, we're fascinated in what you're thinking, your thoughts, we want to know these, and you can post them on Twitter. And it would just, help us feel more motivated. So they convinced the manager to post on Twitter. And, by the end of the frame, we realized that, they're really sort of using this information in order to understand, when they should be looking busy. So it's really the manager's fear of how this information will be used. But honestly, this can work both ways. We're already starting to hear stories about employees forgetting that they friended a manager on Facebook and then, talking about a really boring meeting or something inappropriate on Facebook about their manager. And, so it is not only should be a fear for managers, but employees also have to understand that the information they provide on these sites can also be used against them. So I think we're going to hear more of these types of stories, in 2010 that will make people start to think about, okay, well, we do need guidelines about what's appropriate for Facebook versus LinkedIn and other public sites. So I just wanted to use this cartoon because I think it really hits home what some managers in large organizations fear. Another barrier is sort of top-down one-way communication channel. So this is about controlling information, and, it's okay and works well for overall organizational procedures, goals, and strategy, but it doesn't really work well when we talk about coordination, problem solving, and resolving conflict. So the top-down one-way communication channel, it doesn't really help employees in their daily issues that kind of pop up ad hoc, and that's what the horizontal communication is for, and that's really what social networks introduce and enable, is sort of helping with coordination, tapping into resources, crowdsourcing questions that you may have to kind of solve a business issue. So there's really a need for both types of channels, but the problem is when you only have a method for doing one, and support for doing just the top-down without the horizontal. So we know that the root of most corporate dysfunction is a breakdown in communication, which is often sent down the line. So I think social networks actually help by enabling sort of this horizontal transfer of information and not waiting until it trickles down the organizational chart. So again, you want to have both, but the problem is when you only have, that top down. So it's really time for managers to kind of, get off the podium and step down and really engage with their employees. Another issue is when social activities aren't really integrated into the workflow. I call myself out here. I will be the first to admit some days I'm just so busy. I'm thinking, how can I participate on Twitter? And I don't actually do this, but, I posted a picture that kind of shows like a to-do entry, and it says, at a minimum, check your @replies and retweet someone. So when these activities aren't really built into what you're naturally doing, they feel like something extra. If your corporation doesn't really prioritize this, it falls on the plate at some point, especially this time of year when people are crazy. I know I am. So trying to find time to keep participating and having conversations on Twitter is really hard when I have a bunch of research deliverables that require a lot of focus and, a lot of analyzing. So, talking to Sandy Carter of IBM, I really learned that, IBM is a company that really worked to integrate social media with other marketing activities. It wasn't about dropping old activities or adding something new. It was about how can we integrate this new channel into what we're already doing. So it really makes sense and was not seen as something completely extra to do. And I sort of had this comment that, it fails if it becomes seen that way. So you need a lot of support from the top, obviously, for this. But that is being really important that companies think, how can we integrate this into what we're already doing? Another concern I have for companies is that when there's a lot of focus on individual, we're certainly an individualist, country, but, when you have a company that focuses the performance reviews, the bonus structure, recognition, and awards are all about the individual, then, don't expect employees to volunteer information and really contribute to the broader community. That there is, incentives can help here. A lot of people who are really excited, and I'm sure everyone on the phone is, about social media, really jazzed about this. It's easy to be passionate and want to participate, but there are definitely people within organizations that, need a little bit more to get them to participate and just sustain this activity. So I see this as being something that organizations can look at and start to consider about how can we reward collaboration and increasing our employees and our customers sort of working together and innovating on products, services, and sort of taking that into recognition, not just the individual performance. Competitive culture, I thought this was a great picture. Social software kind of makes the invisible visible, and that can, for some employees, be a little unsettling. So, there are really no blinds with social media, and we see here, the guy sort of hiding behind the blinds, so that not really being possible anymore. And that if you have a culture that is somewhat competitive, you might have employees who are very motivated to hoard information. Obviously, that's not really good for trying to free information, which is what the promise of social networks and social media. Another issue is not having guidelines or training. I published a report about best practices for social media guidelines, and, I talked to Mayo Clinic, SAP, Intel, and HP, and talking to these companies, I learned that employees, seek guidelines and training on how best to use, especially since there's a lot of confusion, guidelines actually encourage participation. Now, I'm not talking about policies or restrictions, but guidelines that are written well actually help boost these activities because workers feel more comfortable. So the survey data that I show is, we asked in our survey last month, has your organization published official social media guidelines for employees? And we found that less than half had. And this isn't of all organizations. It's important to understand that these were organizations who already said they were implementing a social media strategy, but they didn't actually have published guidelines. So I think that's important to note, because I would expect or hope that this would be a greater percentage of those who did have published guidelines. So I think we'll start to see more of that over the next year. Not really working very well with my builds here, sorry. But, the guidelines really help establish a framework for everyone to kind of get on the same page and promoting good behavior. It's not about restricting or saying thou shalt not do this. So that guidelines are actually a good thing in supporting these activities. A hard lesson learned by many companies is that, technology is only good as its user. So training and support is kind of critical to help and make sure all your employees are up to speed. I mean, some people say this is a generational thing. I don't think it is. I think it's more tied to familiarity with personal use. I definitely know people much older than myself who rock at Twitter. So I really, maybe in the broad scheme, larger picture, there are definitely some generational influences, but I think it's more closely tied into how familiar you are with just using these tools. There are definitely nuances that you learn when you're communicating at scale or communicating with a community versus just sending an email to one person. Another big area, which I, spent a whole webinar on and should actually, definitely is something that everyone's fixating on, is sort of this, what is the value, what is the return on investment for social media, and not having methods for measuring this being a huge inhibitor to really finding success. I think we're starting to move away from this, but this idea that the metrics were really just basic overall numbers of active members, site visits, members posts, and what the CEO wants to know is how does this help my bottom line? And companies are struggling with this more than they realize, and I think that's because, as Rachel Happe, said earlier in a previous webinar, this requires huge investment of time, and a lot of the success stories we're hearing today, people say, remember, we've been doing this for a while. So it's taking us a while to really learn how to measure this or to really see that return on investment because the soft metrics sort of come easy in the beginning, and Mike, you can probably talk about what awareness is seen, but the harder metrics kind of come over time. Certainly marketing has been sort of this art and science of it's not always, your efforts are really a culmination of many impressions over time, social media being a piece of that, but it's not, X equals Y necessarily. And so that's kind of being a stumper for many companies. But going back to examples like Dell and IBM, they realized that we don't necessarily need new metrics because we see social media as a part of our ongoing marketing campaigns. So we're going to stick to our core business objectives and what we're already measuring and how social media kind of helps with those initiatives. So I think that's been easier to wrap your head around, but certainly something we can debate later. And companies will ask me, well, how much should I spend? And I'm recommending that, you start small. There are certainly companies that have spent, $1 million on software are still challenged to find value, and there's some companies that haven't spent anything on social media and are finding tremendous value. So it's really going back to the people driving this being very smart and strategic and having a very solid, thorough plan. So you really want that before you jump right in and start making all these investments, before really knowing what you want to measure to begin with, so you have a baseline and a comparison level. Could spend a ton of time on that, so I wanted to make sure we have enough time for our Q&A. So kind of combining the last two barriers, no executive sponsor and no role modeling. and I've sort of, positioned some CEOs that I think are really demonstrating great leadership in using social media and really setting the tone for the rest of the company. Employees are used to taking the lead from upper management, and if upper management is not participating, employees might start to feel like, well, are they lurking? Are they, you have to kind of, you have to eat your own dog food here. So everyone really needs to participate in this, and, it really, the support needs to come from the top. Having an executive sponsor to work through your politics within your organization is really key. And the role modeling can come from a senior executive, or it can come from, we've seen some departments start to deploy pilots and really provide some role modeling, but just having something that works or within your organization that really illustrates, yes, this will work for our company. So these two things being critical. So now we're back to, the question that we sort of posed on Twitter, who owns social media? And I missed to kind of asking a trick question, actually. But I also need to bring to your attention that at this point, we do have a poll, so I don't know if we can bring up the poll. But this is kind of asking you and forcing attendees today that if you had to choose between these different departments, corporate communications, marketing, IT, the CEO, sales, who should own these initiatives in a corporation? This is just a quick poll, not hugely sophisticated, but we thought it would be interesting to ask and pose right now. So while you guys take it, I'll tell you what we found with our survey last month is that we asked which departments are implementing your organization's social media strategy. Obviously, these numbers add up to more than 100%. So we find that, many departments are implementing a social media strategy. And the real question is, well, is the strategy aligned across your corporation? Because you want to be consistent with your messaging internally and externally. So we know that right now we're seeing a lot of fragmented use, ad hoc adoption. This is definitely going to change as the market matures, but it's really important, and I'll already kind of, give my opinion, which you can take it or leave it, but I don't really know that this is about ownership. I think this is about participation. So I think it's, again, to my earlier point, and here we have the results, and I'll speak to those in a minute, but, I argue that no one really owns this. People can drive it, and I promise not to be biased, but based on some case studies and interviews I've done with companies, a lot of people do agree that marketing or corporate communications are great departments to start this because they're used to, at least when we're talking about external communications, already, being in the public sphere, communicating about your corporation. It's already well-trained in how to do these types of communications. So I certainly think these departments can drive it, but I'm not really sure anyone should really own it. Back to my point that, we don't want this to be a separate department or some kind of, one department's agenda that somehow can sort of struggle with other corporate agendas. And that, as Dell says, it really should be a discipline of the entire company. So the results show that, and I don't think anyone on the phone is biased, certainly with everyone being in marketing, but I do agree that that's a great department to drive this. Most people are very passionate in marketing about using these technologies, but I warn against this idea of we own this. Because you really are going to need support from customer support. I mean, your customers will comment on these sites. They'll ask you questions that you might not be able to answer, or you might be getting into a legal situation where you do need help from the legal department. So you want to make sure everyone's on board, and that's kind of to make the process painfully slow, but I think in the long run will really help prevent, somewhat internal battles that might occur over this. So I'm gonna start to close with some 10 best practices. So back to starting small. If you haven't really launched full initiatives, really learn as you go. use personally, obviously, to learn the nuances of Twitter versus Facebook. If it's with, public social sites or just starting with small initiatives inside the corporation. I've seen companies, start using Yammer for free and then really see the use case for growing that initiative from there and then broadening to a community platform. Lead with a corporate initiative. Make sure this isn't a department agenda. Time measurement back to core business objectives. Marketers love to be creative, but really, what are your core business objectives? How do you, impact the bottom line and find ways to really to prove that with these initiatives and be able to map those activities. Put your social media people in front to champion. So obviously, having marketing and corporate communications drive this. They're great, passionate champions to have in your organization to start this. Back to having guidelines. They don't have to be perfect, but do incorporate legal, IT, and other departments to have input to help establish a framework for what's appropriate. And that speaks more to public social media usage, but certainly you want people aware of what's acceptable with your organization. Provide incentives for participation, because we start to see this kind of take off in the beginning and then kind of die, or it's much harder to sustain these activities. So to think of ways that you can incent people to continue to participate, whether that's inside or outside your organization. Number 7, keep HR, legal, and IT involved in the process. Don't have their first involvement be when there's an issue. Executive sponsorship as well as role modeling being really important in driving this. And last, I think talking to community managers, how important it is and how much they didn't realize initially. There needs to be ongoing internal education, training, and outreach to employees to really keep everyone excited about what the company is doing with customers through social media. So we had another poll that we were going to post up here that really also asked, out of the 10 operational challenges that I presented today, for your company, which is really the top barrier, the top challenge, if you had to pick one of those. So, want to toss back over to Mike, but want to, highlight that we'd like you to kind of give us some feedback on what you think, and I can definitely speak to the results.
Well, very, very cool. So before we get to the, Carolyn, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. We have a bunch of questions that came in, so I hope you can hang around for a couple minutes. I know we're up against the block here, but as people are answering and responding to the poll, I just wanted to pull up one real quick thing. First, if you need to get in touch with Caroline, there's all her contact information right up there. Try to write it down now. I'm going to jump to another slide. There's a bunch of great related research that you haven't seen from IDC is just terrific for any of the stuff that people are looking to research, and really supports a lot of the things that we talked about today. And I'm just going to skip ahead, just to let you know a couple of upcoming events for awareness. We haven't announced these on the site yet, but we have Katie Payne coming in early January. We're going to be doing some stuff with our friends over at Radian 6, talking about sentiment monitoring. Andrew McCaffrey from Harvard, he's the author of Enterprise 2.0. He's going to be coming out, and we're going to be doing a session in February. And then Greg Cangelosi, the email marketing guru, is going to be out here talking to us as well. He's a great guy, good friend, and I'm sure he'll have a lot of great things to say. So that's it. If you want to check this stuff out, go to awarenessnetworks.com, and hopefully we'll be updating it pretty soon. So last but not least, the questions, Carolyn. So there was a ton of buzz on Twitter about a couple things that you brought up. And one of them I wanted to talk about, you said that software doesn't make your business social. I just want to make sure I get it straight. So if people buy awareness, it doesn't mean that they're just a social company?
Yeah, I figured I needed to clarify that statement. So this
I'm just kidding.
this kind of works both ways. So it's kind of what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? So software enables, but I think we should be clear that it doesn't guarantee. I think over the next year we're going to hear, and I'm starting to hear from customers, that they had these just very grandiose expectations of what external community would do for their business. And, this takes patience, and I think, sustaining these activities through, meeting patients and the CEO always knocking on the door, well, what is our return for this investment? I think you need to definitely make sure that you look at your organization and make sure that there's enough support there to get through that period that you need to have patience. I don't think social software automates socializing your business. So that I could go on. I don't want to take up too much time on this question, but I think my point today was sort of to take a different perspective. I mean, analysts at IDC typically talk a lot about the technology, but so much of the story that keeps coming up is, well, we have the technology, but we're still having, some issues with this. We still need some greater understanding and support for this because, it's not as easy as we thought.
Absolutely, and I was just being funny about everything, but that's the same thing that I think a lot of companies that we work with, that we encourage a lot of our companies to do. And I think it's kind of what you said, that the software doesn't mean that the strategy that you have, and I think you said it up front, is going to work. I mean, it's not just build it and they will come. It's you have to have a strategy behind what it is that you're doing. You have to have a business case behind what it is that you're doing, and those are the companies that are most successful using social media. And it definitely goes through the organization as well. Making sure that people are out there and they're participating and conversing and listening and all the important stuff that we've heard kind of across the board. That's really the important stuff. And you're right, technology is just the enabler of that.
It's an important enabler. It definitely helps with scale and speed. So, sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to say that you don't need software, but the strategy is and the support for this and the culture is just
Absolutely.
It comes up over and over again in terms of people sometimes feeling like they're struggling with this.
So one of the other things there's a stat that came out early, and it got a lot of buzz during the session. It was the 54% question that 54% of companies are kind of blocking the social stuff from the CIO survey that you put out.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to change going into 2010 or even beyond?
Well, first of all, I just want to be clear that was actually Robert Half's technology.
Right.
In terms of who conducted that survey, and I thought it was interesting. They actually called CIOs up to talk to them. So this is what I think is going to happen. I think over the next year, these efforts, it's an uphill battle. You can't control or block this. You might be able to do it maybe, within the working environment, but certainly we know, and I can't think of the data point, but IDC has done research on this about how many people are working at night, working on the weekends. I might have my personal device, but not my corporate BlackBerry, but I need to send a work message. I mean, how many of us are using Gmail sometimes? We may or may not admit it. I think the concern for IT is just now they're kind of freaking out a little bit, that all of this is going on. Some IT departments don't really even know. So it is a little scary for them, but I think there's going to be an adjustment on their part. And I, as an analyst, and I know other people in the space are really pushing to don't control this, don't block this, just find ways to promote good behavior. And recognize that it's just a wild west out there. I don't know if that answers the question, but I was surprised by that statistic. It was
I think it surprised a lot of people. It seemed, like I said, people were retweeting it kind of all over the place and still are.
That's just through Twitter that I found out that stat, actually, when preparing for this. So I thought, not to be controversial, but, we didn't ask the question in our surveys that exact way. So it's kind of hard to present survey data without having it in front of people. But our survey, we asked if you were not using consumer social media, why not? And the top question was that, IT doesn't allow it. But that was of a subset of a group, so we didn't have really it wasn't representative to all companies in the U.S. So I thought that Robert Half Technologies, by doing a phone survey with CIOs, kind of present that perspective.
Yep.
So we're obviously IDC continues to measure this. So I think we're going to see slightly different reports. I mean, I know when I looked at my own survey, I did see high usage among IT. So again, it's a part of what I love about my job is it's not obvious exactly what's going on, but I do think, attending, certain trade shows that there is this pushback from IT, certainly. I mean, is it 54%? Well, that's what that survey showed. So I think what we'll see is that prohibiting is not really the answer. But, again, I want to continue to look at this and measure it because I think it's definitely going to be, part of the struggle within an organization. I don't know what comments. I haven't been able to multitask, so I don't know if people have commented that they disagree with that stat.
It's mostly just sharing it, to be honest. I don't think anybody's taking a position either way. I think, people are, if anything, I think it was surprising to the people that were out there. I saw some those great Twitter buzzwords like wow or woo or stuff like that. So hard to kind of summarize. But it seemed like people were just really surprised by it and wanted to share it because it did come, it is a shocking number to hear that 55% of companies, polled, were saying that.
Yeah, and I'll just point out to the link on this slide that has more information. And just as an analyst, I guess I would say I appreciated their methodology. And we also found reports from web security providers like ScanSafe also kind of supporting the stat in a way that they saw more companies blocking these sites. So it is happening. I mean, sometimes, and I have to be careful of it, when you're on Twitter and you're surrounded by people who are very passionate, I mean, we easily connect and link together, but sometimes, it is not representative of the entire U.S. workforce, if that makes sense. I mean, not to say we operate in a bubble, but there's definitely sometimes, I noticed on Twitter that especially analysts covering social media, how much traction and how much people are excited about it. And it makes sense because, we're using it because we love social media. But I don't think that Twitter necessarily represents the broader demographic.
That makes sense. Let me ask you one more question about 2010. You talked a lot about corporate guidelines and you had a whole slide on it. And the question that came in was, do you see guidelines being implemented more in 2010? Do you think that's something more companies are going to do?
Yes. I mean, I think that I guess if you think that you can get away prohibiting this, you might not need guidelines. But I think that that's the next step. I mean, that's definitely what we're promoting, and I don't see how it could be any other way. I know, what prompted me to write my report was that, we were just hearing about what the Washington Post did, what ESPN did. We just heard all these stories of companies reacting in a way. Was trying to look for the slide that spoke to those guidelines. But, our survey shows less than half who already have an initiative have guidelines. But I think it's important because not everyone is operating at the same level with social media. And, the companies I did speak to, they said it actually helped our efforts. Our guidelines were driven from people who are very passionate about social media. And, talking about the concept of a community self-policing, none of the companies, Mayo Clinic, SAP, Intel, none of them reported ever actually having to fire someone. I mean, we've heard some of these cases, but, they didn't, but they said that the guidelines actually empowered our employees who were passionate about social media, actually called some colleagues out on not properly using it. So there was that self-policing even within an organization because they could point to, hey, we have guidelines. So I think it's just sort of a precaution. So I think it's important. I mean, if you go onto Facebook and just search, I want everyone to do this because I did it. I had a slide that I dropped because obviously I talk forever, but if you just search for hate my boss, there are groups on Facebook for that. And what's funny is that or not funny, I guess it's kind of interesting and scary, is that you think the information you're posting within your Facebook page is only to your friends, but if you join those groups and post on their walls, the default is public. And we saw yesterday how Facebook, changed their public privacy settings a bit. So I think it's important for companies to just kind of set some boundaries, not restrictions, but just remind employees not to get, you don't want to be talking about future layoffs at your company on Facebook. You think it's safe within your friends, but once they share that information, their privacy settings come into play. So privacy settings, at least on the public social networks, aren't really foolproof, and that's why I actually support the work that you guys do in sort of really helping provide more secure environments for these activities, to encourage workers to use that sensitive information, on a corporate sponsored tool versus out in the public social network.
Well, Caroline, looking at the time, and I know we're a little bit past the hour, so I want to make sure I'm sensitive to everybody that's on the line who might have to run to other meetings. So I just want to say thanks very much. I think people got a ton out of it. You can tell just by, I'm sure when you get back to your desk, you'll be able to check out the Twitter stream and see just kind of what everybody said. I think it was really well received. I think people got a lot out of it, and I did. So I really appreciate you taking some time with us today.
Thank you. And I would just say I use the hashtag socialbiz, again, not trying to own it, but happy to continue the conversation on Twitter through that hashtag, so everyone, and I'm certain that people use, the Awareness Inc. hashtag for today. So I'm really excited to see that, actually. So I thank you, and, sorry I didn't get to a lot of questions, but certainly can continue the conversation on Twitter.
Sounds great. Well, thanks again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.